Welcome to K6 Wellness Revolution, where we believe health is worth fighting for. This podcast focuses on all things related to natural health, wellness, and vibrant living. We know your time is valuable, and I'm honored that you're spending some of it here. So get ready, because the Wellness Revolution starts right now.
Now we're going to go down 2 rabbit holes. So I love 2. Well, I realize that one may be a little bit of a stretch for people because they don't really understand it, because you've talked about these test kits and the ampules, and there's this physical presence of a pathogen or a remedy. So in the software, we're not dealing with an ampule or a test. We have language. We have libraries and sets of foods and pathogens and pollens and animals and emotions and geopathic stressors and weather patterns. And I mean, what else am I leaving? I mean, there's tons. How many? Like over 40,000 things in the library? Way more than that, I'm sure.
Yeah, when you download all the sections of the library that are available, it can be as much as like 45,000 different items. It's, a lot of things.
Why does it work when it's words on a screen versus an ampule?
Okay. Back in the early 1980s, there were a couple of things going on in the world of technology. One was the advent of the early personal computers, and they were called IBM clones. IBM came out with the PC, and then everybody cloned it with these cheaper models. And what it really did is it made, fairly powerful computing available to the mass market. So, it was really a huge step. Now, there was a practitioner in here. By the way, I'm located in Las Vegas, and there was a practitioner. I wasn't here at that time, but back in the early 80s, there was a doctor here, a guy named Fuller Royal, a medical doctor, that was using a Volt device. And he was good at it. He had a very successful clinic called the Nevada. Was that the Nevada clinic, I think? Anyway, he, along with a physicist, a guy named Roy Curtin, another physicist named Pete Peterson, and then a guy who they hired to do some of the software work, decided that they were going to make a prototype to try and take advantage of the power of a personal computer to try and make the process of testing somebody more efficient. And why is that important? Well, you have to understand that the German doctors that invented with all these test trays and all the expense of them, but it was more about time.
Yeah.
It would take literally the better part of a day to test somebody. And most of that was literally getting up and down out of the chair, or having somebody go to the closet, get the right test tray box out, get the right ampule out, put it in the thing. Oops, that one didn't work. Let's try another one. Oh, we got to go to this other box here. And it just took forever.
Mm-hmm.
So they built a prototype. And I don't have pictures of it. I don't know if anybody does. But basically, it was an old desktop, clone PC, on a black and white screen. This is a long time ago. Computers
is that the Computron?
Well before the Computron, actually.
Oh, okay.
It was actually, so this was just a prototype. And this thing was really clunky. But for the measurement side of things, they used the Dermatron, actually the same device that I showed you that early picture of.
Mm-hmm.
That's what Fuller Royal was using for measurements. And then they had the PC. Mm-hmm. And then they had 2 other gadgets. One was a big box that was, we'll call it it's called a switching mechanism. It could switch between one circuit and the next based on the command of the computer. And it was hooked up, with what's called a serial cable to the computer. And then attached to that switching box was a big contraption that was basically plywood, like inch-thick plywood with holes drilled in rows and columns, and you could put an ampule down partially into each of those holes. And they would actually get the ampules for testing. And they had a fairly good library, maybe 1,000 of them or something like that. And it covered a pretty wide range of issues. And they would drop the little ampule in, and then they would wrap a coil of wire around it. And the ends of the wire would go back to the switching mechanism. So what would happen is you go to the computer, and the software was very primitive. It was literally just an alphabetical list of 1,000 things, basically, on a black and white screen, because that's all there was back then. And you could scroll down to, for example, let's say mercurius, mercury in homeopathic form.
Right.
And you would hit enter. And what would happen is the computer would send a signal to the switching unit. The switching unit would activate that coil of wire, would close that circuit around that ampule of mercury homeopathic.
Right.
Okay. Now, all that switching mechanism and stuff was connected to the hand electrode that the patient was holding.
Right.
So it brought it physically into the field of the patient. So it's kind of like the wire acts as an antenna wrapped around the ampule, and it's hooked up to the
There's still
switching
actual connection to the substance that you're testing.
Yeah, you're testing an actual ampule. Mm-hmm.
We're not doing that now.
That's right. Yeah. Well, anyway, so this is how, and by the way, one little thing about a lot of times, some of the greatest inventions in history are literally stumbled on more than you realize. So I spoke about how they stumbled on this idea of remedy testing with this doctor that came in with a heart condition,
right?
Back in the early days of this. Well, here are these doctors in the United States, or this doctor in the United States, and these scientists were playing around with this prototype. And what they found is that when they were using it in testing, it worked beautifully. It was very efficient compared to what they were used to doing. Mm-hmm. I mean, you just go down the list and you hit enter, and it would activate that particular ampule into the circuit. Made it really streamlined. Right. And it proved out to test properly. The answers they were getting made perfect sense. And they also matched up with doing things manually. If they actually took the actual ampule out and put it in circuit with the patient to hold it and so on. It all worked great. The thing that would really bother them, though, is they found out that the switching unit wasn't doing anything. It literally electrically wasn't functioning. And this absolutely stunned them. And they go, this can't be right. And luckily, one of the people on this team, this physicist, Roy Curtin, really a brilliant man, really smart guy.
He's an amazing guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy. And, Roy realized that there is an absolute connection, especially in the world of physics, where they believe that everything is really all about intention.
Right.
Things that even matter is literally intention woven together. That's partially what the string theory and so on is all about. And so their idea that, the word representing mercury is not entirely different from mercury. It's the actual substance.
Right.
So this kind of opened up the door to making machines really economically feasible for the market, where you didn't have to have a giant thing with thousands of these costly ampules. And the thing was as big as a refrigerator, or even more. I mean, it was huge.
Yeah.
And imagine if you had thousands of remedies in it, the cost and the size, it would get nuts and all the wires coming out of it. Mm-hmm. So they realized that they could use words to actually create and use that for testing purposes. And in spite of what some of the other companies out there say, and some of the other doctors even believe, how these machines work, they're all based on this principle. Roy Curtin called it the Hololinguistic Effect.
Yeah.
That the nature of things is holographic. It's not just one-dimensional. It actually, all things, if you break them down even to their smallest divisible amount, still embody everything that the original substance is. And the same goes for the representation of that substance. In other words, MERCURY in the world of physics is not entirely different from the actual substance mercury.
Yeah.
And your body knows that. Your meridians are really tuned into that. And because of that, this works beautifully, where we can create a database of different causes, different conditions, different remedies, and use it for testing very efficiently.
And I think that's great. I love the way you explain that. And I think too, to the way that it has been traditionally explained, which is technically very incorrect. And I mean, I was very fortunate to learn first from Roy Curtin, and then I met you. And so I feel like I've definitely been taught by the greats. But what is so hard, I think, for clients is that, they come in and they're like, well, what is the frequency of this? And it's not a frequency, it's language, right? And we're delving into the very hard to explain part. And it's kind of like Emoto's work with water, the messages in water. It's like, why does hate labeled on a jar of water look so different under the microscope than the water that was labeled with joy and love? And, words have power. And I think that hololinguistic idea is very applicable. And definitely, with the software, I love the software, and I tell clients this all the time because number one, if you compare it to muscle testing, I'm not fatiguing a muscle. We are getting way more specific information. And even though we're not diagnosing with it, we're getting information about the body, and we're able to catalog and save that information and compare session to session the changes going on in the body. And I think there's a lot of value there.
Lots.
So tell me the next. So that's the first rabbit hole.
Well, hang on a second. Hang on a second. Let's kind of close the loop here on a couple of things. So, God, we've covered a lot, so I want to make sure I don't forget this. So a couple of things about EAV. So, by the way, you use the term EDS, which stands for electrodermal screening.
That's just what's commonly used. People know what that is.
Yeah, it's the original language acronym for this was EAV, Electro-Acupuncture, according to Voll, V-O-L-L. All right. But a couple of things that are really brilliant about this is these technologies, the real legitimate devices of this type where you're actually measuring the actual meridian using a point probe and getting a real measurement of the actual meridian, and then introducing something into the equation and seeing how that meridian responds. That's the basis of this. But this is something that actually proves out to be real, proves out in real scientific studies. If you want to take a look, there's a website called EAVresource.com. And on it, I can do screen share. I can show you this.
And we'll put that in our show notes so people can go to it.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, here it is.
Discussions.
So one of the things in this article is there's a study that was done by a couple of friends of mine, a guy named Dr. Ken Pittaway, who's a very well-known EAV practitioner up in the Detroit area. He's an acupuncturist, naturopath, homeopath, along with a guy named Dr. Arthur Erickson. Now, sadly, Arthur passed away a few years ago, but Arthur was one of the top neurologists in the world. Was board certified down at Baylor Medical in Houston and so on. Arthur was not into EAV testing, but his wife was big time into EAV testing. In fact, there was kind of a landmark case. She was the first case of somebody that had breast implants that had developed serious health complications that ended up suing, I think it was DuPont. She was the first suit that actually came through.
Wow.
And who she went to in terms of testing and figuring out how to get well was Ken Pittaway up in Detroit. And he really turned her health around. So she convinced her husband to, wrong guy, sorry. Let's go back here. This one right here. She convinced him to work with Ken to do a study. Now, this is really kind of interesting. There have been actually a lot of studies that have been done, and these are real medical studies. Some of them have been published, but primarily in European or German medical, articles, in medical, journals and so on. So, I don't have permission to print those. This one I do have permission to publish it on my website, EAV Resource. So this is a cool study. It was done a while back. Arthur was doing a study for one of the big drug companies where he had 100 cases. He had thousands of cases where they'd done biopsy work to determine if a person did or did not have a particular neurological disorder. And then if they determined that there was a specific therapy, that's what the drug company was interested in. But they had all these people that they knew definitively either did or did not have this disorder. Biopsy's black and white. It shows you they do or don't. Mm-hmm. So they took 100 people, half of them positive, half of them negative. They had them sign off on an extended part of the study. They brought Ken down with his equipment, and he tested these 100 people, and he came up with the exact same results as biopsy in this study, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
Biopsy is painful and you have to take a chunk of the tissue out versus just testing them with an EAV device.
It's amazing. I love that.
Yeah. And there have been lots of studies similar to this that are published over in Europe. And they all hold up identically. The results are either equal, if not better, than a lot of medical procedures, especially with allergies and so on.
Yeah.
So,
and the allergy testing of recent is really come under scrutiny because of the lack of reproducibility with so much.
Study you're talking about, like RAS and scratch tests you're talking about?
Yeah.
Well, and to give you an example of that, there was a study done in Germany. It was actually presented at Medical Week, which is a big conference in Baden-Baden. In Baden-Baden. In Bath. That's what it means in English. So, and I was there when they presented it, and I was there with Andreas Marks, and he kind of translated for me. But the deal is that there were a couple of three EAV practitioners that took a sample of, I think it was 166 clients. Half of them were positive reaction to a specific pollen, and the other half weren't. And they knew this by two things. One was symptoms, and the other is they'd done scratch tests on them. So they knew basically who was positive and negative through a normal medical procedure. And then they had the three EAV guys test them. The three EAV practitioners came up with the exact same results as each other. Okay. So everybody that was positive with one was the same with each and every one of them. What was interesting, though, is about 5% of their results showed positive where the scratch test didn't. And, and not just scratch, it was also subclinical symptoms. Right. So what you find is that this device, and this is one of the things I wanted to bring up, is using this device can be kind of an early warning system to something that's coming down the road. Right. The meridians are hyper sensitive to everything going on in your body. I mean, literally, they know every molecule that's in you. So, you can address their knowledge and their sensitivity to figure out what's going on before you'll see it in symptoms, before you'll see it in other methods. Right. And that's one of the brilliant things about these machines. And also just sensitivity on a level that you can't get through a lot of other procedures. Yeah. A lot of doctors use blood work because it makes sense. A lot of stuff does show up in the blood. But keep in mind that blood, by its nature, the body does everything it can to keep the blood clean and consistent because it's vital to running your body and the health of all your vital organs and so on. Yeah. So a lot of times infections and so on don't show up in the blood because the body's doing a good job of keeping it out of there, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a problem. Right. The problem's there. It just doesn't show up where you're looking.
Right.
All right. Awesome. Anyway.
Okay. My second rabbit hole. And we're not going to go, I don't know how far down you're comfortable going, but so in my practice, I mean, I'm here in Dallas, we have people come in, but we also do virtual appointments. So I have clients all over the world.
So we are going to
know where I'm going with this. So some people don't understand this, and maybe I don't do it justice explaining it. Now I have this podcast that I'm putting on my website so people can watch this and become intrigued. But why I want to give a little story. I had this young client, and she has this condition that, again, always shows up because she was born with it, and it definitely defines her life, limits, a lot of her quality of life in a sense. But she's doing remarkably well. And I think EAV testing is a lot of the reason why we've been able to give her great quality of life and enjoy the level of health that she does that. And her mom takes great care of her. But
hang on a second, Sharon. So the testing is one side of it, but also using the machine to determine what the therapy and having great remedies and so on.
Right.
What really gets people better, not the testing side.
Right. Absolutely. But the testing is what helps direct that. So with this girl, every time I test her, there was always her respiratory system, the lung tissue, especially the right lung, would always show up. Well, one day I'm testing her and she's hundreds of miles away. And everything is muscles and joints and spine and trauma and injury. And I was like, what in the world? And then she was, a teenager. And I said, something happened to you? I mean, I'm not getting the normal stuff that I get. This is really strange. And part of me was like, am I off? What is going on? She said, oh, I forgot to tell you, I fell down the stairs yesterday and I feel so bad head to toe. I am black and blue. And I was like, I mean, people think they don't know what to think of this, but that was like, to me, I hate that she fell down the stairs, but it's just reinforcement that this is real. This isn't hokey. I don't understand it. And maybe there is no measurement tool to tell us why that works, but I want you to go down the rabbit hole of virtual testing with me and just give us maybe like a 5-10 minute spiel on why does it work?
Okay. So Sharon didn't get into some of my background, but I've got a pretty good science background. For first couple of years of college, I went to one of the top engineering schools in the world, Colorado School of Mines. I ended up getting a business degree, but science comes to me pretty easily, and I've had the opportunity again to really work with a lot of brilliant, hardcore, PhD, double PhD scientists, that are interested in this field, like Dr. Wolfgang Ludwig and so on. Anyway, guys, there's a lot of this thing. This whole thing is a stretch. It's a leap of, you just have to just kind of let go and let it happen. The fact that we don't know what meridians are is leap number one. The fact that you're dealing with homeopathy, that's you're conveying a message through water that's been pounded into it. Give me a break.
Thanks for making it.
But there's something going on with it. Yeah, there's something really going on with it, and you see that in the results, and it's way beyond placebo. By the way, one of the things that really convinced me of that, because I'm not an easy sell on this stuff. I mean, it was a stretch for me to figure out what was going on with this. I could see that something was going on in terms of results. Look, I'm going to back up and tell you a couple anecdotes real quick. Many years ago when I was first getting started, I got to know a guy named Tom Lyle. And Tom was a representative for the Computron, okay? And was an avid user of it. Tom was a guy who had made a lot of money in nightclubs in Los Angeles. He was not a doctor by any means, but some part of him was a healer, and he gravitated towards this and he became very good at it. He had a kid that came in one day. This is a true story. Had a kid that came in, severe autistic case, where you couldn't touch the child and he would, lash out and scream. The kid had no communication capability, no social functionality whatsoever. And what was odd about this case is the kid was probably around 8 or 9 years old, good-looking young kid. You'd never know except by how he was responding socially. But one day when he was younger, the kid literally fell out of a tree. Literally. Not a long distance. He fell onto soft dirt, but he fell out of a tree. And then within a matter of weeks, he literally went down and spiraled down into this severe autistic state. And the parents they were people of means, and they'd taken this child all over the world to try and get him taken care of, see what was going on. Because he was a healthy, happy kid one day, next day not so much. Tom used a technique, so he tested the kid, and he found the kid was loaded with primarily heavy metal toxicities. Like just all kinds of stuff showed up. And then he did something called imprinting, where you use the wavefront.
Yes.
Okay. Which is a real stretch. Because again, this is based not so much on hard science as it is kind of fuzzy stuff. A lot of it's intention and being able to focus that very directly. And he created an intentional remedy using his version of that a long time ago on that machine. And he said, why don't we try it out while you're here? Now, he couldn't give it orally to the kid because the kid would snap at it with his teeth, the eyedropper. So he had the mother rub it on the child's elbow. And by the way, he couldn't test the patient, the actual child. He tested the mother's meridians while she was holding the child. So again, the meridians are hypersensitive to everything around them. And if they're given kind of a sort of a nudge, you can get them to source into, to kind of connect to something else, like another person that's, doesn't have to be right next to you. All right. So here he's testing the mother's meridians because he couldn't test the child. Impossible. And this is what he came up with. He makes this remedy. The mother gives it rubs it on the kid's elbow. It's called imbrication. And the kid just like that falls asleep. And I remember Tom says, the mother looks at me and she goes, he hasn't done that before. And he goes, well, why don't you? And Tom's kind of like, hey, what am I going to do here? So he says, why don't you go out in the waiting room and let's just keep an eye on things for a little while if you're okay with your schedule. And she said, sure. So he literally carried the child, the young boy out. He wasn't real big. And, he carries him out and sets him down and props him up so he's comfortable, and sleeping away. And he goes on and tests a couple of other people. And about an hour later, the mother comes in with the child holding her hand, walking in. And he's going, come on, Mom, I'm hungry. Let's go get something to eat. And from that point on, that kid was absolutely fine. Now, how in the world did that happen?
I've had a similar experience with an autistic boy, and I was like under the table, under my desk, testing him because, and I was trying to test him and was getting it done. And
well, hang on a second. Were you testing yourself or are you testing him?
Oh, I was testing him, but he wanted to sit under the table and he was functionless. And I was pretty new with this. I was, very new and did the remedy that was indicated, and he fell asleep under the table.
Really?
Pulls him out. He slept for 2 hours, which he was a terrible sleeper, and he never napped. And it was the middle of the afternoon. I was like, let's just watch, call me, and let me know how it is. And he made a definite shift. Now, it wasn't like that, but there was a definite, we turned a corner and things started markedly improving from that point.
Yeah. So in other words, you gave him that informational package, that intentional, niche, that push that started getting his body to respond and take care of the issue.
Yeah.
So, all right. So how does distance testing work? Well, again, first off, you've got to be willing to take a leap, because a lot of this stuff, you talk to a good physicist that's open-minded about things and you explain this. And I remember one day I was working with this, double PhD physicist, this guy named Dr. Wolfgang Ludwig in Germany. And I was explaining this idea of imprinting to him. He'd never seen it.
Oh.
And I said, and when he was actually the guy that really came up with the schematics and like the electronics for the wavefront.
Oh, okay.
The idea of it came from Andreas Marx, but the guy who really created the machine, the actual working prototypes, and then I licensed it from him, was Dr. Ludwig. Brilliant guy. And Ludwig was, it published, he'd been, he'd won all kinds of international awards in all kinds of areas of science. He was a bright guy, but he had a real penchant for alternative medicine. This is kind of like his passion, doing stuff like this. And he was famous for developing a lot of key devices like the Mora device, a lot of the Vega Select, the Indumed. He was the father of pulse electromagnetic field therapy, which we might get into later, like the little gadget. He's the guy that really started me down that road. Mm-hmm. Andreas Marx calls me up one day and he says, Bob, goes, I talked to you about Dr. Ludwig, and I said, yeah. And he goes, well, he wants to talk to you. And I go, okay. I said, great. And he goes, yeah, you need to book a flight for this Friday to go to Germany to meet with him. This is on a Wednesday.
Oh, gosh.
I'm like, but I did. Thank God I did, And I booked like a flight to stay over there 2 or 3 days. I ended up staying 10 days, and most of it was literally getting an education from this guy.
Wow.
And he really opened himself up to he was wonderful.
So what did he think about distance testing?
So thank you for getting me back on track. So anyway, I was explaining to him about, I brought one of my devices over with the software and showed it. And he says, oh, this is fantastic. And I said, well, you do understand that these are just words on this screen. He goes, that's not a problem. He goes, that makes perfect sense to me. And I go, but, if we're going to build this wavefront, we should think about adding in something called an imprint circuit on it, because the other machines out there have it. There's something to it, but I can't figure it out. I can't figure out if it's just placebo or what the heck's going on here. And he goes, well, what is it? And I explained that basically you're testing something in our software, like a cause of illness, like let's say a specific pathogen, that you're never going to find that specific remedy for it. It doesn't exist. That specific homeopathic remedy for it. It's in our library, but good luck finding anything else past that. But then from that, somehow you create a remedy. And he said, yeah, kind of explain a little bit more. I said, well, you do this and you put this on this device here. And he said, but I said, I've looked inside those devices. There's not much going on there. And he goes, no, of course not. You got that. And he goes, I said, so I kind of get the feeling this is just kind of like a placebo amplifier. And I remember he kind of takes his finger and he goes, don't be so sure about that. Because this guy caught on to this stuff very quickly. Yeah. And I said, well, look, before I get into building this part of this device, I've got to have more substance here. And he goes, yeah. Well, you need to do a test. You need to do a study. And I go, well, how can I do that and screen out placebo? And he said, oh, it's very easy. Do it with animals. Animals don't have a placebo effect. Right. Placebo is basically your beliefs causing an effect on how your body deals with something. Well, animals don't get locked into beliefs. Right. So, by the way, animals respond beautifully to homeopathy because they're not so jaded and closed-minded. They just allow it to happen.
Yes.
But anyway, luckily, I had a couple of friends of mine who were using my equipment that worked with animals on the side. One with prized racehorses and the other one with prized livestock, bulls and pigs. And I told her, I said, look, guys, I'll build a prototype imprinter and a modified version of our software. And we want to create, we want to see if this works with animals because it'll tell me if it's real. And within a matter of a week, and by the way that I said, look, if you're going to do this, you have to test them with the avatar. The only therapy you can use is just imprinted remedies. That's it. And within a matter of a week, both of them were calling me back and they were saying, man, I'm seeing some crazy stuff here. Something's going on. And they weren't seeing it in every case, just like homeopathy doesn't work in every single case. The body sometimes needs the chemistry to make it work. But in a lot of cases, they were seeing complete turnarounds with animals that had long-term issues. So there is something going on. And what's really key to it is intention. Mm-hmm. So imprinted remedies are nothing more than you focusing your intention through a ritual, through the ritual of testing somebody, coming up to the conclusions that are very, very specific, and then doing a couple of physical steps in that ritual to actually create an energetic pattern of your intentions that are very much like an informational homeopathic remedy.
Right. It's still information.
It's information. It's probably not unlike homeopathy at high potency, actually.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, we've done this with our horses, and recently a steer that he was ready to go to butcher, and we do all grass fed, organic, and he started getting a little bloat because one of our shipments was late, so we had to kind of change the grain that we were finishing him on because we're real picky about it. And my husband called me and he's like, you got to work on this cow. And I was like, why?
wait a minute. Is it a steer or a cow? Which is it?
A steer. Sorry, it's a steer. We don't butcher our cows. We need those to have babies. So the steer, I'm not a good rancher.
Well, at least you know the difference. So
but I was able to test the steer and direct my husband to the correct remedy. And
did it work?
He lived. He got over it to die the next day.
Wow. Cool.
But it's money, it's business.
Yeah, that's business. That's part of ranching. It's not.
It's part of ranching. We're trying to. We treat our animals very well, and we take care of them very well, and we try to do right. Okay.
All right. So anyway, about distance testing. So again, some of this stuff is hard to really just buy into if you just live in this world that's just, knock on, hardcore substance. You have to get past that a bit.
Yeah.
You have to understand that these, think about the meridians, for example. I mean, here you've got this network. By the way, something I didn't say about the meridians is they seem to have a couple different purposes. They move energy around in the body. You could call it chi or ki or whatever, but they're more informational than anything else. Mm-hmm. There's this awareness, and they communicate. This is this network of communication within the body that's beyond capability.
Yeah.
But what's also cool about it is it reaches out, completely out. It's not just your body. It can reach out to virtually any distance. Now, physicists don't have a problem with this because the idea of distance and time is different for them.
Yeah.
They're more open-minded. They realize that having to have everything, knock on wood, hardcore, solid, for them is kind of like, you take your desk and you start breaking it down into atoms, or into molecules and then into atoms. And then the atoms are subatomic particles, which are actually very far apart. And that what's in between them is infinite amounts of empty space.
Right.
So what's solid about it? It's our perception. So if you can kind of give up a little bit and say, all right, so you've got these meridians that are sensitive to virtually something else at the other end of the universe, probably. But definitely your meridians can become sensitive if you direct them intentionally to kind of sense into what's going on with somebody at a distance. Mm-hmm. And that's the trick.
Yes.
Is that if you use yourself as what we call a surrogate, you test your meridians, but you've changed their focus to not working on you, to dealing with the issues of a person, no matter where they are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so you test your own meridian points, but now you're getting information about that patient.
That person.
But that's the basic premise of distance testing.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think it's really hard to grasp. It was hard for me to grasp. And I actually, Roy Curtin was the first one to tell me about it. And he talked about the remote viewing projects that kind of got him thinking about it when he worked for the Department of Defense, I think, and some of the stuff that they were trying to, can we see what's happening in Russia, from the US or whatever. He had some real interesting stories, but I definitely had to experience it for myself, and I didn't understand. And I know there are different versions of doing it, but I think you're right. I think it's just understanding that those meridians that we have are able to be very valuable informational tools by which we can draw information off other people that we're focusing. And for me, I use a video. I keep the video of the person in front of me. It helps my focus. And just to have the voice or that person's image, it keeps my focus centered while I'm working on them. And even when we have, I think another example, we have babies, and I'm not going to test a baby, but we do the surrogate testing with the mother holding on to the child, and we're testing the mother's meridians, but we're getting information on the child. And
how can of course you say that a mother is totally connected to their child. Well, on how many levels?
Yeah.
Well, it goes very, 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 very deep. It's kind of like twins are connected. Well, it probably has something to do with this same kind of mechanism. But these meridians, your meridian system is really aware of everything going on.
Yeah.
Period.
Okay. So I want to hear about future developments. So I want to use this last little part of our conversation because we've talked about the history and we've talked about what we can do with it now, but what's coming down the pipes? Are there developments with EAV technology? What do you have to show us?
The current avatar system is the 5th generation that we've developed.
Right.
Generation of hardware and software. And honestly, it's going to be around this generation for a while.
Yeah.
It's solid. It's latest software technology. It's Windows 11 compatible and even down the road and all that kind of stuff. And it's a good, dependable workhorse device that you can count on day after day after day. Mm-hmm. And from my standpoint, as the guy who developed it, that was kind of my main emphasis is as a practitioner, you want to walk in, be able to boot up your computer, open the avatar software, and it opens and works. It's not buggy and has issues. And same with the hardware, that you load your batteries in it and it works day after day after day after day, that it's a workhorse. Because people use these things. I mean, really use them. One thing we can see in like the database records when you save sessions is the number of readings that have been saved. Now, that's not all the readings have been taken. That's just the readings saved in a session, which can be less than half or even a small fraction of what's actually taken. It's not uncommon for a practitioner to log 200,000 or 300,000 readings in a year, which is crazy.
Yeah.
That's a lot of doing.
It's a lot of repetitive movement.
A lot of these guys are wearing the out, But so that's not much going to change there. However, there are some things that are going to possibly, COVID really kind of knocked the air out of a lot of things. It just slowed everything down and made it hard to do things. Mm-hmm. The companies out there that we would normally have prototypes developed with, they're so backlogged because of COVID that it's just taking forever. And because of the fact that, my business is a very small business in a very small industry, I'm one of the little guys. It's not like I'm going in there making parts for an automotive, for 10,000 parts per order. So I get pushed to the back of the line. So it just slows things down. But we're making progress in a couple of areas. So one of the first projects we're working on is this little guy. Okay. Now this is just a shell, but this kind of gives you a sense of size. This will end up being, it'll have a nice faceplate on with switches and LEDs and, like little LEDs to show you things. But this is a little pulsed electromagnetic field device based on this little unit, which is the one that was kind of Ludwig's claim to fame, called the Medicine.
Oh.
So this little device, Ludwig, what happened with him is there was a guy named Schumann, I think it was Carl Schumann in Germany, a physicist who had theorized that there were what he called geomagnetic waves, waves that were part of our environment, frequencies that were part of our environment.
Right.
And one of them was the idea that there's a certain amount of gamma radiation that leaks through the outer atmosphere coming from the sun. The ionosphere is kind of the outer boundary of our atmosphere, and it blocks, most of the gamma radiation from the sun luckily hits it and bounces off into space. Mm-hmm. Okay? If it didn't, the Earth would burn up in a matter of minutes, literally. But a certain amount, most of it goes bouncing off, but a little bit leaks through. Okay? Traveling at basically the speed of light, it comes down to the surface of the Earth about 22 miles down below. It hits the surface of the Earth and then bounces right back up to the underside of the ionosphere, which also is kind of like a double-sided blocking mechanism. So now it hits it, and now it bounces off of it and goes back to the Earth, and it starts going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And it's traveling very fast, and it's covering huge distances very quickly, and it beats at around 7.83 times per second. And that's the Schumann wave. And if people tell you it's something that emanates off the Earth, that's wrong. This is what it is. This is coming from the guy who actually developed the apparatus that actually measured and proved there was such a thing. And that was one of Ludwig's claim to fame. And he published on it and so on. It's also what really got him involved in alternative medicine.
Oh.
Because he started thinking about it, he goes, well, there's this thing called the Schumann wave. Well, from a scientist's mind, he goes, well, why is it 7.83 hertz? Well, that's because of the distance from the ionosphere to the surface of the Earth and how fast it's traveling.
Right.
But that distance isn't the same all across the planet.
Right.
And what happens when the ionosphere gets pushed around because of weather pattern changes? Like when the jet streams push in, they'll literally form a bubble, particularly over mountains, push the ionosphere up. So now you've increased that distance. You've changed the frequency. Now the frequency's slower. Mm-hmm. Okay. Or what if, those collapse and now it becomes faster? You've shortened that distance so it beats faster. Well, he found out that for a large portion of people out there that have certain physical symptoms, particularly some migraine headaches, not all migraines, but migraines that occur when their weather pattern changes. Or if people are in areas where they're under a lot of electromagnetic stress. He found that those people typically have migraines, sleeping disorders, irritability, and lack of focus. And it happens around those changes. So he built this little gadget. And this thing produces it has 9 different frequencies, but one of them, I don't have any batteries in it, sorry. But this runs on a couple of little little AAA batteries, excuse me. And it generates a very clean, kind of an organic version of the Schumann wave at 7.83 hertz. And he found clinically, and they studied this with over 1,000 documented cases where they actually brought it into a study and published it in Germany, that in like 99.99% of the cases that experienced those symptoms around weather pattern changes, it cured the issue right then and there. Like instantly had results, yeah. So that became this little gadget called the medicine. Now, Dr. Ludwig sadly passed away about 5 years ago. And I used to carry his devices for a period of time. And I met Ludwig when he was in his early 80s. And then this is about 20 years ago. And then his health started kind of failing after that. And he developed a relapse of stomach cancer, and he ended up passing away. But he used to make these little gadgets plus some bigger clinical units. And I used to sell them until he couldn't any longer produce them. And he ended up selling the rights to the thing to some friend of his from his childhood, who took the thing and completely dumped it. I mean, just made a mess out of it, sadly.
Yeah.
But in my last conversations with Dr. Ludwig, he said, you should do something with this. He goes, you understand this. And he goes, yeah. And you know how it works and how it did that. And he goes, I'll give you some information, but just don't do something with it until after I pass away with my information. Because I made a promise to this guy, but I'm okay after I pass away. So that's been a few years, and I'm finally in a position where I decided to create my own version of his device. Okay,
I'm very excited to test it.
Now, one thing that's kind of cool about this one, though, is it'll have basically ampules.
Mm-hmm.
It won't look quite like this. It's going to be a different design, but these will clip into the back of the device.
Mm-hmm.
So why? Well, these you would use your wavefront to create an imprinted or an inverted remedy using your device, Sharon. So you can create like a very specific remedy. Now, something that's interesting about electromagnetic waves at low frequencies, like this is at 7.83 hertz, or like, I think the highest frequency on here is like 32 hertz. So those are slow. Normally frequencies are up in the megahertz, thousands, million hertz range. Mm-hmm. This is slow stuff. Slow frequencies like this go right through the body. Okay. Another thing about electromagnetics is a strong frequency, what's called a carrier wave, will pick up information on the way and carry it with it. So, in other words, if I have something like this that's carrying this informational pattern, which has electromagnetic components to it, okay? We don't know what those are, but there's something going on that way. And now I've got a strong electromagnetic, so this thing has some kind of electromagnetic and something else signature in it. And now I produce an electromagnetic field that's strong out of this thing, broadcasted out of it. And you wear this against your chest. It's got like a lanyard that goes around your neck. Now this thing's going to literally pick up that information and broadcast it to your entire body. So, awesome. So you kind of get a double effect on this. One is you'll have the benefits of the Schumann wave. Mm-hmm. And in the world that we live in with the amount of electromagnetic stress, Ludwig called it electromagnetic smoke, kind of like smog in LA.
Yeah.
That really does, kind of overcloud our sensitivity to some of these really important geomagnetic waves. Mm-hmm. And by the way, one of the last thing about that is Ludwig found that the Schumann wave seems to be the rhythm keeper for your body. In other words, he felt that it was the hippocampus, that's one of your endocrine glands, is the one that really kind of is like an antenna for it. where they really found this to be effective is he'd published on the effects of migraines and so on with his device. But he got a request for information from the director of medicine for NASA back in the early 1970s. Now, the first space flights, the Mercury program, were a single capsule, and they were very short duration. They literally went up for a few orbits and they came back down. But the Gemini missions were 2 guys, and they went up for as many as 2 or 3 weeks. In fact, I don't know if you remember this, but there was actually a thing they called the Space Lab that they would actually live in for weeks at a time, because they wanted to see if they could handle the long flight to the moon and back.
Right.
And what they found is all the astronauts started experiencing migraines, lack of focus, sleeping disorders, and so on, irritability. And so they said, is there a chance that you can help us out with what you've done? Does this have any application? He goes, yeah. He goes, on your next flight, take up some of these little guys. Actually, with these little blue guys. And it took care of the problem instantly.
Love it.
So he gave them the schematics. And I've got a copy somewhere. I've got a copy of that original letter from NASA. So every space flight that goes up, Russian, American, everything else for any long period of time, has a little Schumann wave generator on it, because your body needs that signal to keep itself in rhythm.
I love it.
So having this in this electromagnetic world where you can broadcast that Schumann wave conveniently kind of keeps you in rhythm, lets your body function more effectively. And you can add to it being able to really broadcast whatever that remedy is in a very powerful way. So it's not the same as just drinking like 10 drops. Every single cell in your body is literally bathed in that electromagnetic signal. So this thing is, this is kind of an early prototype. The final prototypes are done, and we've sent off the drawings to get bids on production. So we're pretty close to having this.
Cannot wait. It's going to be amazing.
Me too. And these will be available. You just asked me about whether or not you wanted to have you do a plug for this. I got to tell you that when I was selling these units from Germany, when I would get them in, I couldn't get them in fast enough. I was selling them through practitioners. I'd sell them to the practitioners, and the practitioners would recommend them for their clients or their patients. And I could not get Ludwig to make them fast enough.
Wow.
Everybody loved the dumb things. I mean, it was just remarkable. I mean, there's just this little simple thing, but people were really seeing some interesting things. Now, this is not going to cure diseases. It's not about pathogens.
Right.
It's not about neurological disorders. But if you can kind of get some of those base rhythms back in order, it can do some remarkable things. And then being able to broadcast more kind of specific information like, helping the body direct its immune response or allergic response. I actually have some experience with some of his big machines doing this. Extremely effective therapy.
It's amazing. So, okay, Bob, as we wrap up, what would you say is a key takeaway for a listener, a lay person saying, "Oh, I want to get that testing," or, what do you feel like the most important things for the general public to understand about EAV or electrodermal testing or whatever bioresonant testing, whatever people want to call it? It goes by many, many names, but EAV is truer to its heritage. What do you think are the key takeaways or the most important things to note?
Well, a couple of things. One, and I kind of left some notes here that I didn't cover a lot of things, but, take, the general public out there and, in today's world, how many of you are buying supplements, or buying herbal remedies, or buying even homeopathic remedies? Now, hopefully you're doing that through a practitioner that knows what they're doing. But even in that case, if they don't have a way of really testing, and yes, applied kinesiology, muscle testing is one way of doing it. But, sadly, muscle testing doesn't stand up well in studies. For the main reason is there's too many reliability factors. The patient has to be holding at the same strength level, or at least kind of close to it, or their arm out at the same strength. You have to pull, and then you have to make kind of like you're just intuitive judgment call. Is it stronger, weaker, and are you influencing that by
pushing harder
variables?
Yeah, it's a lot of variables.
It's not very objective. It's totally subjective is the problem. EAV testing, if a practitioner learns it correctly, and knows how to use the machine correctly is incredibly accurate and reproducible, meaning that even if somebody else tests the same patient after, you test it, they know what they're doing. They're going to get basically the same set of results.
Yeah.
That's really critical. For anything that I manufacture and have developed, it's got to pass that test. It has to be reliable and durable and all that and easy to use, but more importantly, it has to be effective, accurate, and reproducible. So that's one thing. EAV is an amazing test that has reproducibility and accuracy built into it. The other thing is, think about remedies. If just that alone, or even allergy testing, compared to like going to your health food store and saying, well, we find that this remedy works nicely with a lot of people, or your Aunt Sue says, oh, I used this and it got rid of that rheumatism or whatever it is. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you. But if you have somebody test you on an EAV device, like an avatar system, or any other legitimate EAV device, not some of the other kind of wonky random things.
Yeah.
But if you've got a practitioner that knows what they're doing, your meridians are really deciding if that remedy is going to work. And when those readings come down into 50, those remedies work flat out. I mean, you can count on it. And people know that once they've been exposed to this and they have the experience of working with remedies that have been tested properly, they find that it's a whole different ball game.
Yeah.
The remedies they're buying, that they're spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on outside of this that didn't work compared to this stuff works. There's something different about the equation. And, just that alone, or even allergy testing, you can find out real quickly what are your food sensitivities, and then being able to turn those around through
information.
Through information, like focused, intentional information. Mm-hmm. Works like a charm.
That's awesome.
So maybe Bob, that's the idea.
Yeah. Bob, thank you so much. I think we found the perfect place to end this episode. And we truly hope that you, the listeners, watchers, hopefully this time, have found this information helpful. We'd love to hear from you. If you watch this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to our channel, and also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and you can also watch on Rumble. For more information about EAV testing, please visit k6wellness.com to schedule an appointment. And until next time, take care of yourself, because your health is worth fighting for.
Good job, Sharon. Thanks again for having me. Take care, everybody.